He built an empire worth billions, made presidents bow, and buried enemies without blinking. But the one woman who ever truly owned him, he let her walk away in a wedding dress, ring in hand, dignity intact, while he stood frozen like a coward dressed in a tuxedo. 7 years of silence, 7 years of searching, and now she's standing 20 feet away on a stage in Monaco, more untouchable than ever, not because she's bitter, not because she's broken, but because she's free. And he's still the fool who let her go. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and follow so you never miss a single chapter. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where everything fell apart. Oh, the flight from New York to Monaco took 9 hours and 40 minutes, and Damien Moretti slept through exactly none of them. He sat in the rear cabin of his private Gulfstream with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched in 2 hours, watching the amber liquid catch the low cabin light, doing what he always did on long flights, running numbers. Not the kind that appeared in quarterly reports or wire transfers. The other kind. The kind that lived in the part of his mind he couldn't shut off even when he wanted to. How many decisions? How many moments where the blade had turned one way instead of another? How many times he had told himself the life he built was worth what it cost? He was very good at lying to himself. That was the first thing anyone needed to understand about Damien Moretti. The man was brilliant, ruthless, composed, and absolutely capable of performing complete self-deception when the alternative was too heavy to carry. He had been doing it for 7 years. He had gotten better at it every single year. Some days he almost believed it himself. Raphael, his head of security, sat across from him reading a physical newspaper because Raphael didn't trust screens for anything he didn't want traced. He was 52 years old, built like a man who'd spent his 20s getting hit and his 30s learning not to get hit. And he had been with the Moretti organization for 26 years. He knew Damien better than anyone alive, which meant he knew when to stay quiet. He had been very quiet for the last 2 hours. "You reviewed the summit schedule," Damien said. It wasn't a question. "I did." "And?" Raphael set the newspaper down with the careful precision of a man who had rehearsed the next moment in his head. "There's a speaker roster change posted 3 days ago." Damien finally picked up the scotch. "Who?" "Charlotte Hayes." The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The cabin hummed. Somewhere outside, 37,000 feet of nothing separated them from the Atlantic Ocean. "Hayes Atelier," Raphael said, as though Damien needed the clarification. "She's been added as a featured speaker. International humanitarian architecture. They're positioning her as one of the summit's centerpiece voices." Damien set the glass down. "When did she get on the circuit?" "She's been on it for 3 years. You've been avoiding it." Raphael looked at him directly, which was the only way Raphael ever looked at anyone. "You can't avoid it this time. The program puts her in the main hall, 40 minutes after your keynote." Damien leaned back in the seat and stared at the ceiling of the aircraft. The leather was Italian. The aircraft had cost $41 million. He owned 6 of them. He owned buildings in 14 countries, a shipping operation that moved cargo across 3 oceans, and controlling interests in enough legitimate corporations that 3 separate governments had asked him to consult on infrastructure policy. None of that mattered right now. "Pull the keynote," he said. "That's not—" "Raphael, pulling the keynote is not an option." Raphael's voice didn't change. It never changed. That was why Damien kept him. "You cancel Monaco, you pull out of the Voss Group negotiations, you lose the Rotterdam port access, and DeMarco's people read it as weakness. You've spent 8 months positioning for this summit. We don't walk away from it because of a scheduling conflict." Damien turned his head and looked at him. "I know what she is to you," Raphael said, and his voice dropped half a register, which was the closest he ever came to gentleness. "I also know what you are to the organization right now. And right now, you are the only man in that room who can deliver what we need from Voss. Charlotte Hayes being on the same program does not change that." Damien looked back at the ceiling. "She doesn't know I'll be there," he said. "She'll know the moment she sees the program. And she'll be fine, because she's always fine." He said it with something that wasn't quite bitterness and wasn't quite admiration. Something in between. Something that lived in the particular region of the chest where old regret compounds interest. "That's the thing about her, Raphael. She was always going to be fine. That's what I never understood until it was too late. Raphael picked up his newspaper again. Neither of them said anything for the rest of the flight. Monaco in April was the kind of beautiful that felt almost aggressive, the Mediterranean throwing light at you from angles you weren't prepared for, the old buildings stacked against the hillsides like something out of a painting, the harbor full of vessels that represented an amount of combined wealth that would have destabilized small nations. The Global Leadership Summit took place at the Palais des Congrès, a venue that had hosted heads of state and Nobel laureates, and on at least two occasions that Damien knew of personally, the quiet negotiation of arrangements that never appeared in any official record. He arrived with 4 members of his security detail and checked into the Hôtel de Paris under one of his legitimate corporate identities. His suite overlooked the harbor. He stood at the window for 4 minutes before turning away from it and opening his laptop. The summit program was on the first page of the event website. Charlotte Hayes, Hayes Atelier, founder and principal architect. Featured speaker, Designing for Human Dignity, Architecture as a Force for Social Restoration. Her photograph was small and professional. Dark blazer, direct expression, nothing performative about it. She looked exactly like a woman who had learned to take up space on her own terms. He had known her when she was still figuring out how to do that. He had watched her practice that particular quality in the kitchen of their penthouse apartment, rehearsing presentations to an audience of 0 while he pretended to read the paper. He closed the laptop. The keynote wasn't until the following morning. He had dinner with the Voss Group representative that evening, a Dutchman named Hendrik Brouwer, who had the kind of meticulous financial mind that Damien genuinely respected. They ate at a restaurant the hotel recommended, and Damien performed what needed to be performed. Charming, informed, slightly intimidating in the way that money and authority created without any deliberate effort. He quoted infrastructure projections and environmental compliance data from memory. Brouwer was impressed. The evening ended with a handshake that meant something. Damien returned to his suite at 11:15, poured 2 fingers of scotch, and stood at the window again. Somewhere in this city, Charlotte Hayes was sleeping. Or working. Probably working. She had always been a night worker, chasing ideas through the hours when the world went quiet. He used to lie awake listening to the soft scratch of her pencil on drafting paper, finding it the most peaceful sound he had ever heard. He drank the scotch. He did not sleep. The keynote hall held 600 people, and it was full. Damien walked onto the stage at 10:15 and took the lectern with the particular ease of a man who had made his peace with being watched. He was 6'2", dark-suited, dark-haired, just beginning to gray at the temples in a way that his team kept suggesting he address and that he kept ignoring. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who ran things, who had always run things, who expected to continue running things indefinitely. He spoke for 35 minutes on international investment architecture, global capital flows, the ethical obligations of wealth at a certain scale. He was not performing. He actually believed most of what he said, which was what made him effective. The audience was attentive. Several took notes. When he finished, the applause was genuine. The conference host, a French woman with the title of executive director, stepped back to the podium while Damien was still making his way off the stage. "Please welcome our next featured speaker," she said, her voice carrying with practiced ease through the hall's acoustics. Founder of Hayes Atelier, recently named among the world's most transformative entrepreneurial voices, and designer of humanitarian infrastructure projects across 4 continents, Charlotte Hayes. He was 3 steps from the side exit. He stopped. He did not intend to stop. His body made that decision without asking him. She came from the opposite wing. Ivory blouse, dark-tailored trousers, no jewelry except small gold studs at her ears. She moved the way she had always moved, without hurry, without performance, as though the stage were simply another room she had decided to enter. Her hair was natural, close cropped now, where it had been longer 7 years ago. She looked exactly as he remembered, and completely different in ways he couldn't have anticipated, which was somehow worse than either alternative. The audience applause continued. She reached the lectern. And then, because the angle of the room made it inevitable, her eyes swept across the stage perimeter and found him standing there in the wing, 3 steps from an exit he hadn't taken. The moment lasted less than 2 seconds. Her expression didn't break. That was the thing. He had spent 7 years imagining what her face would do when she saw him again. The grief, the anger, the damage he had put there. Instead, what crossed her features in that fraction of a second was something he had not prepared for. Not rage, not pain, recognition. Calm, complete, and total recognition. The kind that looks at something and simply knows, I have already dealt with this. Then she looked away. Back to the audience. Back to her notes. Back to the room full of people who had come to hear her, and she began to speak. Damien stood in the wing for another full minute before Raphael's hand landed on his shoulder and steered him gently toward the exit. He let himself be steered. He needed the next 3 hours to function like a normal person, so he functioned like a normal person. He attended a breakout panel on sustainable development financing. He shook hands with a Brazilian infrastructure minister who wanted to discuss a port expansion project. He had coffee with Raphael in a side corridor and reviewed the afternoon's agenda. He did not think about the way she had looked at him. That was a lie. He thought about almost nothing else. At 12:40, he was crossing the main atrium toward the conference restaurant when he heard her voice behind him, not directed at him, talking to a group of 3 or 4 people with the easy authority of someone accustomed to holding a room without trying. He kept walking. He made it perhaps 8 more steps before the reasonable thing, the sane thing, the thing that served every interest he had, lost its battle with the thing that had been losing battles for 7 years. He turned around. She saw him turn. She was already watching, which told him she had been aware of him before he turned, which told him that the calm she wore was constructed, not effortless. That small detail landed somewhere in his chest and didn't leave. The people around her looked between them with the quiet curiosity of people who have just registered they may be standing in the middle of something. "Charlotte," he said. There was a pause. It lasted the length of a breath. "Damien," she said. Her voice was professional, neutral, the voice she would use addressing a name on a conference program. Then, to the people around her, briefly, "Excuse me just a moment." They stepped aside. She didn't move toward him, so he covered the distance, 5 steps, and stopped 2 feet from her. "You look well," he said, because his vocabulary, which had never failed him in a boardroom or across a negotiation table, apparently decided to commit complete abandonment in this exact moment. She looked at him the way you look at something you expected and prepared for. "You haven't changed much," she said. "More gray." "I earned it. I'm sure." The silence between them had texture. It was not empty. It was full of 7 years' worth of things that had taken up space in the absence of being said. "I'd like to have dinner," he said, "while we're both here. One evening." She looked at him for a moment. He couldn't read it, and Damien Moretti could read most people in the first 40 seconds. Charlotte had always been the exception. She was the only person he had ever met who he could not reduce to legible components. "I know what you want from that conversation," she said. "Then you know more than I do. I just want to sit across from you without a conference hall between us." Something moved behind her eyes. Not softening, more like consideration, the same expression she used to get when she was evaluating a design problem that didn't have an obvious solution. "One dinner," she said. "Not because of anything you're hoping for, because I'm a grown woman and I can have dinner with whoever I choose. Tomorrow evening." 7:30. She named a restaurant near the harbor, small place, not hotel affiliated, somewhere she had clearly already identified. She had thought about it, which meant she had known, before he said anything, that this moment was coming. That knowledge settled into him like something with weight. 7:30, he said. She nodded once and turned back to the people waiting for her, and that was the end of the conversation. Oh, there were 41 years of Damien Moretti's life before Monaco, and most of them were about the organization. He had not chosen the life the way people in movies chose it. No dramatic moment of initiation, no deliberate crossing of a line. He had been born into the gravitational field of the Moretti Syndicate the same way some men are born into accounting firms or military families. The choice, if there was one, had been made so early it had ceased to feel like a choice. His father, Vincent Moretti, had built the organization across 3 decades with a combination of strategic intelligence, absolute brutality, and an instinct for legitimate cover that kept them largely invisible to the law. By the time Damien was 20, he was managing the legitimate business infrastructure. By 25, he was managing everything. Vincent had been proud. Vincent had also been the most dangerous man Damien had ever known, and Damien had known some men. The problem with growing up in the shadow of a man like Vincent was that you spent your adult life sorting out which parts of yourself were genuinely yours and which parts were constructed to survive proximity to him. Damien had been doing that sorting for as long as he could remember. He was good at the work. He was also aware that the process was probably never going to be finished. He had been 31 when he met Charlotte. She had been 28, 3 years out of graduate school, operating a small practice in Chicago while also consulting on a Manhattan affordable housing initiative. She had been at the gala not as a guest, but as a panelist. One of those events where the wealthy gathered to feel involved in solving problems they'd had a hand in creating. Damien went to those events for the same reason he went to most public events, because visible presence in philanthropic spaces was one of many components of legitimate cover, and because his actual philanthropy, which was more extensive than his public profile suggested, was something he kept private on principle. Charlotte had been on a panel about equitable urban design. She had been the least famous person on the panel by a significant margin, and she had been the most interesting person in the room by roughly the same margin. She spoke without hedging. She challenged the moderator when the moderator said something imprecise. She was not trying to be impressive. She simply was, in the way that people who have thought deeply about something are impressive whether they're trying to be or not. He had introduced himself afterward. She had shaken his hand, recognized his name, and said, without particular inflection, "You own the Meridian Tower development on the west side, among others. The community displacement figures from that project are public record," she said, "in case you weren't aware." He hadn't been dismissed like that in a very long time. He found it, against all reasonable expectation, completely charming. He asked for her card. She gave it to him with the expression of a woman who was not particularly convinced he would use it thoughtfully. He used it. He called her 4 days later, not because any strategy told him to, but because he had been thinking about the things she said on that panel and wanted to continue the conversation. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. He rescheduled 2 calls to do it. He was not a man who rescheduled calls. They had dinner 2 weeks later. Then they had dinner again. Then they were spending weekends in Chicago, and then she was flying into New York when the consults brought her there, and then neither of them was bothering to pretend that what was happening was casual. She was the first person in his adult life who engaged with him, as though the money and the power were incidental to the actual person underneath them. She was also the first person who pushed back hard enough to find out whether there actually was a person underneath them, which had required some uncomfortable looking on his part. He told her what he was. Not everything. There were things that couldn't be said to anyone who wasn't already inside. But enough. Enough that she understood the shape of it. Enough that she could have walked away with full information. She had gone very quiet for several days. Then she had come back and told him she wasn't walking away, but that she needed him to understand something. "I'm not with you because of what you have," she said. "I'm not with you in spite of what you do. I'm with you because I believe you have a choice about the kind of man you're going to be, and I believe you haven't finished making that choice yet." He had said, "That's a complicated kind of faith." She had said, "It's the only kind worth having." He had almost been the man she thought he was. He had come close enough that he could feel the edges of it. And then his father had gotten involved. Vincent Moretti did not view his son's personal life as private. He viewed it as organizational infrastructure. A mafia boss's wife was not simply a spouse. She was a structural element, a symbol, a political position within a community that ran on appearances as much as on force. He had been managing Damien's personal life since Damien was in his 20s, and he did not intend to stop managing it because his son had developed what Vincent characterized, with complete contempt, as sentiment. He had disliked Charlotte from the first meeting, not because she was unimpressive. He was too intelligent to dismiss her abilities. He disliked her because she was ungovernable. She did not respond to the social pressure that Vincent applied effortlessly to everyone in his orbit. She was polite, she was direct, and she was entirely indifferent to his approval, which was the one thing Vincent Moretti genuinely did not know how to handle. "She has no loyalty to the family," he told Damien, 3 months before the wedding. "She's loyal to me," Damien said, "which stops being sufficient the moment your interests and the organization's interests diverge," Vincent said. "And they will diverge. You know they will. She knows what I am. She accepts it. She accepts who you are now. When the work requires something that costs her something, she will not accept it. And when she leaves, because she will leave eventually, they always leave, she will leave knowing things. She won't. You don't know that. Vincent leaned forward across the desk. He was 63 and still physically imposing, and his eyes had the quality of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating what other people were worth. I know you believe you do, but you are talking about trust in a woman who has not yet been tested by the things that will test her. I am talking about what happens to this organization if you are wrong. Damien had ended that conversation. He had not resolved it. He should have resolved it. The wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday in April. 400 guests. A ballroom at a hotel on Park Avenue that Charlotte had chosen because it had natural light, which mattered to her even in a venue that would hold 400 people. She had designed the florals herself, or rather had worked with the florist for 4 sessions until the florist understood what she was after. She had done everything with that same combination of vision and care and refusal to do things halfway. She had also done most of it alone, because Damien had spent the 2 months before the wedding inside an organizational crisis that he could not share with her, dealing with a hostile move from a Philadelphia operation that wanted a piece of the Eastern Port access. And by the time he had resolved it, quietly, expensively, finally, he looked up and realized the wedding was 3 weeks away, and he had barely seen Charlotte in 60 days. She had not complained. She had asked him directly, twice, what was happening, and he had told her truthfully that there was a business problem that required his full attention and that he would explain when it was resolved. She had nodded and said she trusted him and gone back to finishing the architectural commission she was completing before the wedding. That was the thing about Charlotte. She extended trust like it was a reasonable thing to do, which meant that when he betrayed it, the weight of that was entirely on him with no ambiguity whatsoever. The morning of the wedding, he was in the hotel suite with his groomsmen, getting dressed, and Raphael came to the door and told him that Victoria Sinclair was in the hotel lobby asking to speak with him. His first response was confusion. His second was a cold sensation in his chest that he recognized as something being wrong. Victoria Sinclair had been in his life for 8 months, 4 years before Charlotte. She was from a Chicago family with syndicate connections, beautiful in a very deliberate way, socially adept in the manner of someone who had learned to deploy charm as a tactical instrument. He had ended things with her without particular drama when he realized that what they had was fundamentally a performance by both parties. He had not thought about her seriously in years. He went to the lobby. She was dressed as though she had been crying, which was information about her level of preparation rather than her emotional state. She told him, standing in a hotel lobby while 400 guests were arriving upstairs, that she was still in love with him, that she had made mistakes, that she needed him to know, before he married someone else, that she had never stopped. He stood there and listened to it. He should have walked away in the first 30 seconds. He knew that. He had known it for 7 years. He had replayed that conversation so many times that the edges of it were worn smooth, and in every single replay he identified the exact moment where a better version of himself would have said, "I'm sorry, but this has nothing to do with me today," and returned to the elevator. He did not do that. What he did instead was stand in the lobby for 19 minutes, listening to Victoria's performance, and feel something he had thought was fully resolved start to move in him. Not love. He did not love Victoria, and had not for years. But doubt. The specific corrosive doubt of a man who had been in a crisis for 2 months and had barely slept, and was about to make a permanent, irrevocable commitment to a woman who deserved better than what he had available to give her right now. That was the thing Vincent had known. That was the opening his father had created, not by making Damien doubt Charlotte, but by making Damien doubt himself. Placing Victoria there, in that moment when he was depleted and stressed and already half convinced he was insufficient, had been surgically precise. He called off the wedding by phone from the lobby while Victoria stood beside him and his groomsmen were upstairs and 400 guests were seated in a ballroom. He did not speak to Charlotte directly. He did not have the courage for it, a failure he would spend the next 7 years being unable to forgive himself for. A member of his staff went upstairs and delivered the message. He found out later that Charlotte had been told in the corridor outside the ballroom, already dressed, and had stood very still for a moment, and then had asked for 5 minutes. When the ballroom doors opened, she walked in herself. She found him in the atrium because she was not the kind of woman who needed to be led anywhere. She was wearing the dress. He had never seen her in the dress, because they had honored that particular tradition, at least. It was simple by the standards of what wealthy brides wore, ivory silk with no embellishment, because Charlotte thought excessive ornamentation on architecture and people were both usually compensating for something. She looked devastating. She looked like the woman he was supposed to have married 40 minutes ago. She walked up to him and removed the engagement ring, the cushion-cut diamond he had spent 2 weeks selecting, and placed it in his palm. He tried to speak. "Don't," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely level. She looked at him without anger, which was somehow the most terrible thing about it. "Don't explain. Don't defend. I need you to understand one thing." She closed his fingers gently around the ring. "You didn't choose her. You chose fear. And I deserve someone who isn't afraid of choosing me." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she walked toward the exit without looking back. He called after her. He did. He said her name once, and she didn't stop. And he did not follow her because he was still holding the ring she had put in his hand, and the reality of what he had just done was arriving the way serious damage always arrives. Delayed, massive, and impossible to reverse. 3 days later, he sent a driver to their apartment. The apartment was empty. She had moved out everything that was hers in 3 days. Left nothing. Not a book, not a note, not a single object. He walked through the rooms, which still had his furniture and his things exactly as they had been, and stood in the kitchen where he had listened to her sketch at night, and understood that he had destroyed the only life that had ever felt like it was actually his. He found out about his father 2 weeks later. One of his own people. A man who had served Vincent for 15 years and Damien for 12, and who had a conscience that functioned erratically, but did function, came to him with the information. Vincent had arranged Victoria's appearance. He had been tracking Charlotte's movements through a low-level operative, had identified her schedule, and had called Victoria personally, offering her enough money to make the performance worthwhile. Damien sat with that information for a long time. Then he went to see his father. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He sat across from Vincent in the study of the Moretti estate in Connecticut and told him, with complete calm, that what he had done was unforgivable, that Damien would never forget it, and that the nature of their relationship had just changed permanently. Vincent looked at him without apology. "I did what the organization required," he said. "The organization didn't require anything," Damien said. "You required it, because you are afraid of any version of me that doesn't need you." Vincent said nothing. "I'm going to find her," Damien said. He did not find her. He spent money he had not spent on anything. He used connections that reached into databases that weren't public record. Charlotte had, in 3 days, managed to disappear in a way that suggested she had been thinking about exactly how to do it, or that she had simply made herself too busy moving forward to leave any trail of standing still. He found references to a small architecture firm being registered in Chicago 6 months after the wedding. Hayes Atelier. He found news mentions 18 months later, then international coverage 2 years after that. He watched her career unfold in public record, and he was categorically unable to get in front of her, because she was always moving, always working, always somewhere new, and because some part of him, the part that was honest when the self-deception finally ran out, knew that showing up in her path uninvited was not something he had the right to do. He had not earned that right. Vincent died of a cardiac event 14 months after the wedding. Damien became the undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, the most powerful position he had ever held and the least satisfaction he had ever felt in achieving something. He was 39 years old and at the top of everything and completely alone in the way that people are alone when they have removed the one person who made solitude feel different. The restaurant Charlotte had chosen was 6 tables and a view of the harbor, and the kind of quiet that costs money in Monaco without announcing that it costs money. Damien arrived 2 minutes early. Charlotte arrived at exactly 7:30 in a gray dress and her same gold studs, and sat down across from him with the ease of someone who had decided before arriving that she was going to be fine, and was. They talked for a few minutes about the summit. She asked about the Voss negotiations with what seemed like genuine professional interest, and he answered honestly. She talked about a project in Nairobi she was returning to after the summit. The conversation had the pleasant surface quality of 2 people who knew how to talk and were temporarily talking about things that didn't matter. Then she set down her water glass and looked at him directly, the way she had always looked at things when she was done being patient with the preliminary. "Say what you came here to say," she said. He looked at her. "Is it that obvious?" "Yes." He exhaled. He had prepared versions of this. Every version sounded insufficient when he imagined it, and they sounded more insufficient now. "I want you to know what happened," he said. "All of it. Not for any reason except that you deserve to have the full picture, because you never got it." She was quiet. He told her about his father, about the operative, the money, the calculation Vincent had made. He told her about Victoria's performance in the lobby and the exact nature of the doubt that had opened in him, not toward Charlotte, but toward himself. The depleted, insufficient, half-broken version of himself that had been standing in that lobby. He told her about finding out afterward, about the conversation with Vincent, about the useless confrontation that couldn't undo anything. He did not make excuses. He named the failure precisely. He had been afraid, and the fear had beaten him, and he had let it. Charlotte listened to all of it without interrupting. She had always been that way. She let you finish, completely finish, before she said anything. It had taken him a long time to understand how rare that quality was. When he was done, there was a pause. "I know about your father," she said. He looked at her. "You know, I know what he did. I found out about 3 years after. Someone who had worked for him contacted me because they felt I had a right to know." She watched his face. "I've known for 4 years, Damien." He didn't know what to do with that. "And you never—" "What was I going to do with it? Come find you?" Her voice was quiet but precise. "It didn't change anything. It explained something. There's a difference." He looked at her. "It should have changed things." "Why?" She asked it genuinely, without accusation. "Because now it's your father's fault instead of yours. You still stood in that lobby for 19 minutes. You still made the call. Whatever Vincent put in front of you, you still chose it." She paused. "I don't say that to hurt you. I say it because I spent a long time being honest with myself about what happened, and I think you deserve the same honesty." He said nothing. "I forgave you," she said. "Years ago. Not for you. For me. Because carrying that much anger is expensive, and I needed the energy for other things." Something moved in him. Hope, reflexive, stupid. The same hope that had been waiting for 7 years to find a purchase point. He could feel it the way you feel an injury when the adrenaline drops. She saw it. She saw it immediately, which was why what she said next was not cruel. It was careful. "Forgiving you doesn't mean I want you back in my life," she said. "Those are two different things, and I need you to understand the difference, because I think part of why you're here is that you don't." He looked at her across the table, in the small restaurant, with the harbor behind her and the Mediterranean light fading outside. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not weakening, not softening into what he wanted, but something more complex, something that looked like honesty about the fact that this was hard for her too. "You're not entirely wrong," she said, "but the fact that it's hard for me doesn't mean the answer changes." "Then what does it mean?" She picked up her water glass, looked at it, set it down. "It means we're having this dinner," she said, "and maybe you deserve to know that it isn't easy. But after this dinner, we go back to our separate lives, because I built mine from the ground up, and I love it too much to risk it on something that already failed once." Damien held her gaze. Outside, a boat moved through the harbor, its navigation lights cutting small, bright tracks across the water. "One question," he said. "Not for leverage, not for anything. I just need to know." She waited. "Was there ever a version of this, any version, any different choice I could have made, where it would have turned out differently?" She was quiet for a very long time. "Yes," she finally said. "There was." She said nothing more, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the specific weight of everything that version of the story might have been, sitting between them on the table, like something that had been there for years and had run out of room to wait. Damien looked at her, and he understood, for the first time with his whole chest rather than just his mind, that he was not going to get back what he had lost, that it was gone in a way that was permanent and earned, that Charlotte Hayes had loved him, fully and completely, and had survived him, and had built something extraordinary out of the rubble he had left her in. He also understood something else. the thing that arrived underneath the grief, slower, heavier. She had said there was a version, a different choice, a road not taken, and that meant this was not finished in the way he had been telling himself it was finished. That meant somewhere, underneath everything she had said tonight, was something that had not yet been completely resolved. Not for him. And if he was reading her correctly across 7 years of learning how to read her, not entirely for her either. He didn't know what to do with that. He also knew, with the certainty of a man who had built an empire on the ability to read the long game, that he needed to be very, very careful about what he did with it next. Because Charlotte Hayes was not a woman you pursued. She was not a woman you outmaneuvered or charmed or convinced with the right words in the right order. She was a woman who decided things from the inside out, on her own terms, in her own time. And if there was any version of this story left to be written, it was going to require something from him that he had never successfully given another person in his entire life. Not power, not money, not intelligence or strategy or any of the tools he had spent 4 decades building. Something much harder. Something he wasn't sure he was capable of. She was already reaching for her coat. Well, he walked her to the street in front of the restaurant. There was no dramatic moment. She said goodnight with exactly the dignity she had walked into that ballroom 7 years ago, and she flagged a car, and the car took her away. Damien stood on the street in Monaco for a long moment. He did not know yet that the following morning, when he arrived at the summit for the second day, a member of Charlotte's staff would approach Raphael with a sealed envelope. He did not know yet what was inside it. He did not know yet that what Charlotte had said over dinner, "I forgave you years ago," was not the whole truth. That the name of the person who had contacted her about Vincent was someone he knew, someone inside his own organization, someone who had done it not out of conscience but out of calculation, because they wanted Charlotte as leverage, and they had been waiting 7 years for the right moment to use her. He did not know any of that yet. He knew only the harbor and the light, and the particular silence of a man standing at the edge of something he cannot yet see the full shape of. He put his hands in his pockets. He started walking. The envelope arrived at 7:52 in the morning. Raphael brought it to Damien's suite without comment, which meant he had already decided the comment could wait until Damien had seen the contents. That was one of the things Damien had always valued about Raphael. The man had an instinct for sequencing. He knew when information needed to arrive alone. Damien was on his second coffee, standing at the window in a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, watching the harbor fill with morning light. He took the envelope without turning fully around. Cream paper, no return address, his name written in a hand he did not recognize. Sealed with wax, which told him this had been prepared with deliberate formality. Someone had wanted him to understand that what was inside was meant to be taken seriously. He broke the seal with his thumb. Inside was a single card. 4 lines, printed, not handwritten. "You think you're here for the Voss Group. You're here because we need you to be. Walk away from Charlotte Hayes, or she becomes a problem we solve without you." He read it twice. Then he set it on the window ledge and stood very still, looking at the harbor, letting his body do what it always did when something required real calculation: go quiet. Heart rate dropping instead of rising. The particular stillness of a man who had learned over a long lifetime that the first response to a threat was almost never the correct one. "Who delivered it?" he said. "Slid under the door," Raphael said. "Between 6:15 and 7:30. I checked the corridor cameras. Whoever it was knew the blind spots." Someone who's been in this hotel before. Or someone who was briefed by someone who has. Damien picked the card back up. The printing was standard laser. The cardstock was high quality, but available in any upscale paper supplier in Europe. Nothing identifying, nothing that gave him a direction to move in. "She needs to know," he said. "She needs to be protected first," Raphael said. "Knowing and being protected aren't the same thing, and right now we don't know what we're protecting her from." Damien turned away from the window. He looked at Raphael with the expression that meant he was already 3 steps ahead and needed the person in front of him to catch up. "She's not going to accept protection from me, not after last night." "How did last night go?" "It went exactly the way it was always going to go." He set the card down on the table between them. "She forgave me years ago and has no interest in revisiting that conclusion." Raphael looked at the card. His face didn't change, but something in his posture did. A very slight shift, the kind that meant he was reclassifying the situation in real time. "This changes the geometry." Yes. Someone in our organization contacted her 4 years ago, told her about Vincent. Damien looked at him. You knew that. It was not a question. Raphael met his eyes without flinching. I suspected. I didn't confirm it until 6 months ago. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the comfortable silence of two men who trusted each other's processes. Something with an edge. Who? Damien said. I have a name. I'm not certain enough to give it to you yet. Raphael. If I give you a name and I'm wrong, you'll act on it, and we'll have made an enemy we didn't need. Raphael's voice was flat and precise, the way it got when he had decided something and was prepared to defend the decision. Give me 24 hours. I'll confirm it. Then you'll have the name and we'll both know what to do with it. Damien looked at him for a long moment. This was the negotiation they had conducted across 20 years and dozens of decisions. Damien's impulse toward immediate action, Raphael's insistence on completeness before movement. It had saved them both more than once. 24 hours, Damien said. Not a minute more. He found Charlotte in the conference center's east wing at 9:15, reviewing something on a tablet outside the room where she was scheduled to speak on a panel at 10. She was alone. No assistant, no entourage, the kind of self-sufficiency that had always been one of her most distinctive qualities. She looked up when he came around the corner, and her expression did the thing it had done in the main hall the day before. Recognized, assessed, held. I need to speak with you, he said, privately. She looked at him the way you look at someone who is about to complicate your morning. I have a panel in 45 minutes. I know, this won't take long. He paused. It's not about last night. Something in her face shifted. She read his tone. She had always been able to read his tone, even when he was working hard to keep it neutral. And she understood this was different. She gestured toward an alcove off the main corridor, and they moved into it. And she looked at him with the direct attention of a woman who had learned not to waste time waiting for the actual point. He told her about the card. He described the contents exactly, word for word. He watched her face while he did it. She listened without expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You think it's connected to your organization, she said. I think it's connected to someone inside my organization who contacted you 4 years ago about my father. Her breath shifted. A very small change, barely perceptible. He caught it because he was watching for it. She knew exactly what he was talking about. That person said they were acting out of conscience. That person was lying. She looked at him. You're saying someone used me as leverage 4 years ago and is using me as leverage now. I'm saying that's the most likely interpretation of what I received this morning. Yes. And what do you want from me? Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not fear. Charlotte didn't do fear the way most people did, but a kind of tightly managed alertness, the recognition that the ground she was standing on had just changed composition. I want you to let my people be aware of your movements while you're at this summit, he said. Discreetly, you won't notice them, but if someone is watching you, no. She said it without hesitation, not loudly, just with the particular finality she reserved for things she had already decided. I am not putting myself under your organization's protection. Do you understand what that means? Professionally, reputationally, if it ever came out that I had any connection to a Moretti operation, it won't come out. You can't guarantee that. I've been guaranteeing things like that for 15 years. I know what you do. Her voice dropped, not softer, more precise. And I respect that you're good at it. But you're asking me to let the organization that I spent years making sure I had no visible connection to put people around me. That is not something I can agree to. He looked at her. Charlotte, someone just told me to walk away from you or they'll handle you themselves. I need you to take that seriously. I am taking it seriously. Her eyes were steady. I'm also telling you that the solution you're offering has its own set of risks that you're not adequately weighing because you're operating from... She paused, chose the word carefully. Protectiveness. The word landed between them. She hadn't said affection. She hadn't said feeling. She had said protectiveness, which was more accurate and more controlled, and somehow that precision stung more than anything warmer would have. Let me make some calls, she said. I have my own security for international travel. They're not visible, but they're competent. I'll have them increase coverage for the rest of the summit. She held his gaze. That's what I can offer. The rest is not something I'm willing to revisit. He wanted to push back. He had the argument ready. The specific reasons her private security was not equipped to handle what the Moretti organization was equipped to handle. And he could see from her expression that she knew he had the argument ready, and that she was also prepared to end the conversation if he made it. He let it go. All right, he said. You're people. But if something changes, I'll tell you. She picked up her tablet. I need to prepare for this panel. He stepped back. She moved past him into the corridor. He watched her go and felt the particular frustration of a man who was used to being the most dangerous thing in any room and had just been firmly managed by someone who wasn't trying to manage him, which somehow made it worse. The panel went 90 minutes. Damien sat in the back row and didn't announce himself, which was not something he had planned to do. He had gone to the East Wing to intercept a member of the Voss group about a follow-up conversation and found himself standing in the doorway of Charlotte's panel instead and stayed. She spoke about a project in Bogota, a neighborhood that had been designated for demolition, old housing stock declared structurally compromised, slated to become another glass and steel development that the existing residents couldn't afford to live near. She had spent 8 months working with the community, the city government, and 3 different funding sources to produce a restoration plan that preserved the existing structures, brought them to safety standards, and kept the people in their homes. The process had not been clean. There had been a developer with political connections who had applied serious pressure. There had been a moment where the funding looked like it was going to collapse entirely. She described these things without dramatizing them. Just the facts, the decisions, the consequences of the decisions. The hardest part, she said, was not the politics or the money. The hardest part was getting people to believe that someone was actually there to help them and not to extract something. That kind of trust doesn't come because you say the right things. It comes because you show up when it's inconvenient and you stay when it's expensive, and you don't change your answer when the pressure changes. Someone in the panel audience asked her about the moment she had nearly lost the funding. What had kept her going? She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. I had made a promise to specific people, she said. Not an abstract commitment to the project, a promise to people I had looked in the face. That's different. That's harder to walk away from. Damien sat in the back row and did not move. He had lunch with Raphael in a private room the hotel made available on request, the kind of room that existed for conversations that needed walls. Luca Ferri, Raphael said. Damien set down his fork. Luca Ferri was 44 years old, had been with the Moretti organization for 11 years, and currently managed the organization's European financial operations from a base in Zurich. He was intelligent, meticulous, and had always been, in Damien's assessment, slightly too aware of his own value to the organization, the kind of man who calculated loyalty in terms of what it returned to him. You're certain, Damien said. I'm certain he was the one who contacted Charlotte. I'm 83% certain he wrote the card. The missing 17 is the question of whether he's acting alone or whether someone above the European operations is using him as a mechanism. He has no one above the European operations except me, which is what makes this either very stupid or very deliberate. Raphael poured water into both glasses. Ferry has been running the Zurich accounts for 3 years. In that time, he's made several decisions that fall outside the parameters I would have approved. Small things, individually explainable, but the pattern is someone who has been testing boundaries. Why didn't I know about this? Raphael looked at him directly. Because I was handling it, and because until now it hadn't risen to the level where it needed to be in front of you. A man inside my organization has been using my personal life as a leverage instrument for 4 years, and it hadn't risen to... I didn't know about Charlotte until 6 months ago, Raphael said. When I confirmed it, I started building the case. I wanted to know the full structure before I brought it to you, because if Ferry has connections we don't know about, acting on him prematurely exposes us to... Raphael. Damien's voice was quiet, which was the dangerous register. I need you to understand something. Whatever the strategic considerations are, whatever the case building requires, a man in my organization used Charlotte as a piece on his board for 4 years. And then he put a card under my door telling me to walk away from her or he would hurt her. He looked at Raphael across the table. That is not a situation that requires more time to build a case. That is a situation that requires resolution. Raphael met his eyes. I know what you want to do. Then you know why I need the full picture before I do it. Yes. Raphael paused. There's one more thing. Damien waited. Ferry's play doesn't make sense unless there's an endgame. Threatening you into staying away from Charlotte doesn't give him anything by itself. It's only useful if he intends to use her for something specific. Raphael's voice was careful, the way it got when he was laying out something he didn't want to say. I think he's planning to approach her directly, not as a threat, as a business proposition. Charlotte would never. She doesn't know what he is. He doesn't have to approach her as Luca Ferry of the Moretti organization. He can approach her as a European philanthropic investor who has been following Hayes Atelier's work. She's at an international summit surrounded by exactly that kind of person. He has a clean enough front to make it plausible. Raphael paused. If he gets her on record accepting funding from a Moretti front company, she becomes a liability that can be managed, or a weapon that can be used against you. Damien went very still. The thing about Charlotte was that she was clean. Completely, demonstrably, documentably clean. Her funding sources were public record, her partnerships were vetted, her professional reputation was one of the most carefully maintained in her field because she had understood from the beginning that her credibility was the foundation everything else was built on. If someone corrupted that, deliberately, with manufactured evidence, through a financial trail that implicated her in connections she didn't know she had, it would destroy everything she had built. That was what Ferry was building. Where is he? Damien said. Monaco. He arrived this morning. Damien stood up from the table. He was calm in the way that he was always calm when something had tipped from the stage of analysis into the stage of action. The two states were physically different on him. The first was still, the second had a quality of directed momentum. Don't contact him, Raphael said. Not yet, not here. If you confront him at the summit, I know. He straightened his jacket. I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to find Charlotte and tell her what's actually happening. He found her in the hotel garden at 4 o'clock, sitting alone with a coffee and a physical sketchbook. She still worked in physical sketchbooks. She had always said that the weight of the pen told her things about the design that a screen couldn't. She was focused, her pen moving in quick, decisive strokes, and she did not look up immediately when he approached. You're going to have to stop appearing in corners, she said without looking up. He sat down across from her without being invited. She looked up at that, one eyebrow marginally elevated. There's someone at this summit named Luca Ferry, he said, European financial operations. He arrived this morning. He's going to approach you sometime in the next 24 hours. She was completely still. And he's going to present himself as a philanthropic investor. His credentials will look legitimate. He'll probably have a proposal that's specifically calibrated to what Hayes Atelier is working on right now. How do you know what Hayes Atelier is working on right now? Because he's been watching your organization for 4 years and I didn't know it. He held her gaze. Charlotte, he's the person who contacted you about my father. He watched the impact of that arrive. She was very controlled about it. Just a brief cessation of movement, a quality of processing. But it arrived. He told you that, she said. He was identified by my head of security. Why would someone inside your organization contact me about your father and then show up here to offer me investment funding? Because the contact 4 years ago was preparation. He was building a relationship, or the appearance of one, so you'd have a reason to trust him now. He paused. If you accept funding from his front company, you end up on record as having financial connections to the Moretti organization, which makes you a liability, or a tool. She set down her pen. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for things that required her full processing capacity. Absolutely present, completely unwilling to shortcut the understanding. He would do that, she said slowly. He would construct something that meticulous and that patient, just to... She stopped. This is about you, not me. I'm collateral. Your leverage, Damien said, specifically because he knows what you mean to me. The word hung between them. She didn't flinch from it, didn't pick it up and examine it. She moved past it with the practical focus of someone who had identified the actual problem. What does he want from you? She said. I don't know yet. That's what Raphael is trying to establish. And in the meantime, I'm supposed to... What? Avoid every investor at this summit? Refuse every introduction I haven't personally vetted? Her voice was controlled but tight. I'm here to work, Damien. This summit is significant for the next phase of our Nairobi project. I cannot operate under the assumption that every conversation is a trap. I know. Do you? She looked at him directly. Because what I'm hearing is that someone inside your organization has been tracking me for 4 years, has been building a mechanism to compromise my professional reputation, and has threatened you into staying away from me, all in service of whatever he actually wants from you. And the way I find this out is that you come to me at a garden table at a hotel in Monaco and tell me I need to be careful about who I talk to. I came to you because you deserve to have accurate information, he said. Same reason I told you about the card this morning. And if I'd stayed in Chicago, her voice dropped. If I'd never come to this summit, would you have told me any of this then? He looked at her. He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. That's what I thought, she said. It would have been different then, he said. The threat is here because you're here, because I'm here, because whoever Ferry is working with decided this summit was the right moment. Someone above Ferry, she said. She had caught that. He had expected her to catch it. You said Raphael wasn't certain whether he was acting alone. He's not certain, which means there may be someone else, someone who wanted you and me in the same place at the same time. She picked up her coffee, didn't drink it. Someone who arranged for the summit to create this situation. Damien said nothing. Is that possible? She said. Could someone have, in my world, he said, almost anything can be arranged if the motivation is strong enough and the timeline is long enough. She set the coffee down. She was doing the thing she did when she was working through a structural problem, going very quiet, building the load-bearing elements in the right sequence before adding anything on top of them. He had always found that quality in her extraordinary. He found it extraordinary now and also, given everything, quietly terrifying. What do you need from me? She said finally. I need you to tell me if Ferry approaches you. That's all? That's the beginning. He looked at her. I need you to trust me on this. Not because of what we were, because I'm the person in this situation with the most accurate picture of who these people are and what they're capable of. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in that look, a calculation, but not a cold one, something that was wrestling with itself. I'll tell you if he makes contact, she said. That's what I can give you. All right, Damien. She waited until he met her eyes. If this goes the direction you're clearly afraid it might go, if this gets dangerous in the way I think you're not saying directly, I need you to be honest with me about what we're in the middle of. No management, no deciding what I can and can't handle. I've been handling my own life for 7 years and I've been doing it well. He held her gaze. I know you have. Then act like it. He stood up from the table. He was halfway across the garden when she spoke again. He introduced himself to me already, she said. He stopped. He turned. She was looking at him across the garden table with an expression he had not seen before, something that was almost like the recognition she had shown on the stage, but this time aimed at him and less resolved. This morning, after the panel, he said his name was Anton Breve, and he represented a Geneva-based philanthropic investment group. Her voice was completely steady. He asked if I had 15 minutes tomorrow to discuss co-funding the Nairobi expansion. Damien stood very still. I said yes, she said, because I didn't know who he was. The garden around them was quiet, late afternoon light falling across the stone path, the Mediterranean doing its indifferent, beautiful thing in the distance, an entire summit full of people conducting their legitimate and illegitimate business in the comfortable proximity of wealth. What time? He said. 10 o'clock. The conference center's side lounge. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, less than 18 hours. Raphael needed 24 to confirm the full picture, and Damien had just learned he had less than half of that before Ferry, or whoever was using Ferry, and he was increasingly certain someone was, made his move. Charlotte was watching him with that particular expression she got when she was reading the space between what someone said and what they meant. She had always been able to do that. It had always made him feel both seen and, in moments like this one, exposed in ways that had no tactical answer. How bad is this? She said. He looked at her across the garden. He told her the truth. I don't know yet, he said. And that's what worries me. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up her sketchbook and closed it. And the quiet sound of it was somehow final. A closing that was not just of the book, but of the afternoon, of the particular safety of not yet knowing exactly how serious the thing was that was coming toward them. 7 years, she said, almost to herself. I built everything I have so that my life would be completely mine, so no one could reach into it and use it against me. She looked up at him. And here we are. He didn't answer. There was no answer. She stood up, picked up her coffee cup, and walked back toward the hotel, without looking back. He watched the door close behind her, and in the silence that followed, standing alone in the garden in Monaco with the light changing on the water, and 19 hours until a meeting he could not allow to happen, Damien Moretti understood that the conversation he had most needed to have, with Raphael, with himself, with the particular person inside his organization who had decided that Charlotte Hayes was a piece to be moved, was no longer the kind of conversation that could end without permanent consequences. He pulled out his phone. He called Raphael. We don't have 24 hours, he said when Raphael picked up. We have until 10 tomorrow morning, and I need everything you have. Now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. There's something else, Raphael said. His voice had a quality that Damien had heard perhaps 5 times in 20 years. The particular flatness of a man delivering information that changes the shape of everything else. The person above Ferry. I have a name. Damien waited. It's Marco, Raphael said. Marco Moretti, Damien's younger brother. The one person in the organization Damien had never once considered watching his back against, because some categories of betrayal were simply too fundamental to build a defense against. The harbor light was going gold. Damien stood in it and felt the ground shift underneath him in the specific way that it shifts when the thing you were most afraid of turns out to not be the thing you should have been afraid of at all. The name hit him the way serious damage always hits. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean systemic shock, the kind that starts somewhere behind the sternum and radiates outward until every peripheral detail of the world goes slightly wrong. The harbor light, the stone path under his feet, the distant sound of a boat engine somewhere in the water. Marco. Damien stood in the garden and breathed. Say it again, he said into the phone. Marco, Raphael said. No qualifier, no softening. I've had the financial trail for 6 hours. I didn't want to bring it to you until I was certain. I'm certain. How certain? The Geneva front company that Ferry is using, Anton Breve, the identity he gave Charlotte, it traces through 2 shell layers to a holding structure that Marco established 14 months ago. The initial capitalization came from the Zurich accounts that Ferry manages, but the authorization signature on the structure documents is Marco's. Damien said nothing. He's been building this for over a year, Raphael said. Ferry isn't the architect, he's the instrument. Marco identified Charlotte as a pressure point, used Ferry to establish contact 4 years ago so there would be a precedent of communication, and then waited for the right moment to activate the play. Monaco. Monaco. Your keynote was confirmed 8 months ago. Once you were locked into the summit, everything else got scheduled around you. Damien walked to the low stone wall at the edge of the garden and put one hand on it. The stone was warm from the afternoon sun. He focused on the physical specificity of it, the texture, the heat, because his mind was doing something he could not afford right now, which was trying to locate the version of his brother that had existed before this information and reconcile it with the version that existed after. Marco was 34, 10 years younger. He had come into the organization at 22, different from Damien in almost every measurable way. Lighter in temperament, socially fluid, better at being liked. Damien had been protective of him in the early years, had managed his education within the organization carefully, had kept him away from the hardest parts of the work until he was ready. He had trusted Marco the way you trust blood, which was to say, he had trusted him without calculation, which was the only way you could trust someone and also the most dangerous way. What does he want? Damien said. Control of the European operations. Ferry has been his mechanism for testing the limits of what he can move through Zurich without your oversight. If he compromises Charlotte, gets her on record with financial ties to the organization, he has leverage over you. Specifically, leverage over the decisions you make about the European restructure. I haven't announced a European restructure. He thinks you're planning one, and based on the restructure, he believes he's going to lose Zurich. A pause. He may be right about what you're planning. Damien exhaled. The restructure had been in his thinking for 4 months. Not announced, not documented anywhere, still in the stage of private consideration. He had discussed it with 2 people. Raphael was one of them. Who else did I discuss the restructure with? He said. Raphael's pause was very brief. No one I'm aware of. Then how does Marco know? Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that contained a recalibration. I don't know, Raphael said. And I should. Yes, Damien said. You should. He straightened up from the wall. I need you in my suite in 20 minutes. Everything you have. Physical copies. He ended the call. He stood for a moment in the empty garden, in the cooling late afternoon air, and he made himself do something he almost never did. He let the full weight of it arrive without managing it. His father had destroyed the best thing in his life through calculated manipulation. And now his brother had spent over a year building a mechanism to use what remained of that damage as a weapon. The 2 betrayals formed a line, one at the beginning, one now, with 7 years of consequence between them. He turned and walked back toward the hotel. Raphael spread 6 physical documents across the suite's dining table. Financial records, entity registration documents, a timeline of transactions, a communication log reconstructed from pattern analysis rather than direct interception. Damien stood over them and read everything twice. He did not rush. Speed in this stage was a way of making mistakes, and he could not afford a mistake. The meeting tomorrow morning, he said. Ferry approaches Charlotte as Anton Brevet proposes co-funding for the Nairobi project, and if she agrees, there will be a contract ready to sign. Standard philanthropic investment language, nothing that would raise a flag to anyone who wasn't specifically looking. But the funding vehicle traces to the Moretti organization within 2 steps. Raphael pointed to a document. Once she signs, Marco has documentary evidence of a financial relationship between Charlotte Hayes and a Moretti front. He doesn't need to make it public. He just needs you to know it exists. And then he comes to me. And then he comes to you, yes. And the conversation is, approve my continued control of the European operations, or this information creates a problem for someone you care about. Damien looked at the documents. She wouldn't sign without her legal team reviewing it. She might not have the opportunity. Ferry will create time pressure. Limited window, other investors competing for the co-funding slot, standard high-pressure close. She's at a summit full of this exact kind of conversation. It's designed to feel normal. Damien straightened. He turned away from the table and moved to the window. The harbor was darkening, the boat lights coming on, the kind of Mediterranean evening that looked like something you'd pay money to experience on any other night. I need to talk to Marco, he said. Not yet. Raphael's voice was firm. If you approach Marco before the meeting tomorrow, he knows the play has been identified and he'll accelerate. Whatever contingency he has built, and he will have built one, comes into motion immediately. Charlotte's exposure doesn't decrease, it increases. So we let the meeting happen. We manage the meeting. Charlotte knows Ferry's real identity now. She goes to the meeting, she records it, she declines the proposal, and we have Ferry on record running a fraudulent identity operation at an international summit. That gives us something to hold over Marco that he doesn't currently know we have. Charlotte is not an operational asset, Damien said. His voice was quiet, which meant it was serious. She is not a mechanism in this plan. I know that. Do you? He turned from the window. Because what you just described is asking her to walk into a room with a man who is functionally operating under my brother's direction, conduct a covert recording, and decline in a way that doesn't reveal she knows who he is. That is an operational ask. It is, Raphael said. And she may refuse it. That's her right. But if she's willing, she'll want to make her own decision about it. Yes. Damien looked at him. There's something else. You said you don't know how Marco knew about the restructure. You need to resolve that before anything else, because if there's another channel in my organization that I don't know about, I'll have it by morning. Raphael. He held the older man's gaze. There was something he needed to say directly without the management of it. If it turns out the channel runs through you, if there's any version of this where you are part of what Marco built, I need you to tell me now. Not because of what I'll do about it, because I need to know what I'm working with. Raphael looked at him for a long, still moment. His face was the same as it always was. Controlled, weathered, giving almost nothing. Then something shifted in it. Not guilt. Something closer to the expression of a man who has been asked a question he has asked himself many times and arrived at the same answer each time. "It doesn't run through me," he said. "But I understand why you had to ask." Damien held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he nodded. "Go find the channel," he said. "I'll talk to Charlotte." He called her room from the lobby phone rather than his cell. She answered on the second ring, and he said only, "I need to come up. There's more. It's significant." A pause. "Room 412, she said. "Give me 5 minutes." She opened the door in a gray hotel robe, her sketchbook on the desk behind her, a half-finished coffee on the nightstand, working, as he had expected, using the evening hours the way she always had. She looked at his face when he came through the door and said, "Sit down," which was not an invitation. It was an instruction, the kind that meant she had already registered from his expression that this required everyone to be off their feet. He sat. He told her about Marco. He told her everything Raphael had laid out, the timeline, the structure, the mechanism, the endgame. He told her what the meeting tomorrow was designed to accomplish and exactly how the contract would work, and what the consequence would be if she signed it without knowing what it was. She sat across from him on the edge of the desk chair and listened to all of it with the same absolute stillness she had brought to their dinner the night before. But this was a different quality of stillness. Last night had been chosen. This was the stillness of someone absorbing a seismic event in real time and refusing to let the ground move under them by sheer force of self-possession. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "His brother," she said. Not a question. "Yes. While you were looking for me for 7 years, his brother was building a file on me." Her voice was flat, not emotional, processing. "I don't know when he identified you as a relevant factor. The earliest documented action is 4 years ago. The phone call." She looked at the middle distance. I genuinely thought that person felt guilty, that they were doing something decent." She paused. "I told you it explained something. When I found out about Vincent, it explained the wedding. I restructured 7 years of understanding around that explanation." "I know. And the explanation itself was manufactured." She looked at him directly. "He didn't contact me because I deserved the truth. He contacted me because he wanted to establish a channel of communication that he could use later. He was investing in a future play." "Yes." She stood up. She moved to the window, not looking at the view, just putting distance between herself and the sitting position, the way people move when they need to think on their feet. She stood with her arms crossed, not defensively, just holding her own weight. "Raphael wants me to go to the meeting," she said. Damien looked at her. "How did you—" "Because it's the obvious play." She turned. "I go, I record it. I decline, you have fairy documented. I'm the mechanism that gives you something on Marco." She looked at him steadily. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," he said carefully, "is for you to be nowhere near any of this. That ship has sailed." Her voice was precise but not hostile. "I'm already in it. Someone spent 4 years putting me in it without my knowledge. Choosing to step back now doesn't make me safer. It just makes me less informed." "Charlotte, would you do it differently if our positions were reversed?" Not a question, a challenge, but a fair one. He looked at her. He did not answer quickly. He gave the question its actual weight. "No," he said. "Then don't ask me to do it differently." She turned back to the window. "I'll go to the meeting. I'll record it. I'll decline." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. I'm doing this because it's the correct play given the situation, and because I refuse to be a passive object in someone else's manipulation. I am not doing it for you. I am not doing it because we have a history. I'm doing it because someone tried to use my career as a weapon, and I have a problem with that." "I understand," he said. She turned to look at him over her shoulder. "Do you?" "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and moved back toward the desk. "I'll need a recording device that isn't my phone. Raphael will bring one tonight. Tell him to leave it at the front desk in an envelope. I don't want him in this corridor." "All right. All you?" She sat back down. She picked up her coffee, found it cold, set it down again. "His own brother," she said again, quietly. "Not to Damien, to the fact itself." "It happens in organizations like mine," he said, "more often than you'd think. Does it? She looked at him with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite understanding. Does it happen because the organization makes people into that? Or were they already that and the organization just gave them the tools? He looked at her. Both, he said. Usually both. She nodded slowly. You should go, she said. You need to deal with this on your side, and I need to prepare for tomorrow. He stood. He was halfway to the door when she spoke. Damien. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her in 7 years and had not expected to see again. Something that was stripped of the careful architecture she wore in public, the composed professional surface. Something that was just the woman underneath it, looking at something that was complicated and painful and unresolved. Be careful with your brother. Whatever he's done, be careful. Because once you do what you're going to do, there's no version of that relationship that comes back. He looked at her across the room. I know, he said. Make sure you want it to be gone before you make it gone. He left. Marco called at 11:47. Damien was still awake, jacket off, sitting at the suite's desk with Raphael's documents spread in front of him, when his phone showed his brother's name on the screen. He looked at it for 2 full rings. Then he answered. You're up late, Marco said. His voice was easy, warm. The voice he used with family, with people he was comfortable with. The voice that Damien had heard for 34 years and was now listening to through an entirely different filter. Working, Damien said. He kept his voice neutral, normal. The voice he used when he needed someone to believe nothing had changed. How's Monaco treating you? Productive. The Voss conversation went well. Good. A pause that had a quality of someone deciding something. I've been thinking about coming out, join you for the last day of the summit. It's been a while since we've been at the same event. Damien's hand tightened very slightly around the phone. It has been a while. Might be worth the trip. There are some European contacts I've been meaning to meet in person. Another pause. How are you finding it? Being back on the circuit. The question was casual. The weight underneath it was not. Different than I expected, Damien said. The Charlotte Hayes thing. Marco's voice stayed warm, which was the most chilling thing about it. I saw she's on the program. That must have been something. It was a moment, Damien said. You talked to her? Briefly. And nothing. We're different people than we were. He let a beat pass. Are you actually thinking about coming out, or are you calling about something specific? A laugh, easy, genuine sounding. Can I check in on my brother? You can. You usually do it on Sunday mornings. Maybe I missed you. Damien looked at the documents on the desk in front of him. The financial trail. The entity structure. His brother's signature on a document that was designed to destroy a woman's life as leverage in an internal power play. Come if you want, Damien said. We'll have dinner. I'll think about it. Get some sleep. You sound tired. I'm fine. Big day tomorrow? The question landed clean and precise, and Damien understood it for exactly what it was. Not innocent curiosity, but confirmation. Marco knew about the meeting. Marco was telling him, in the comfortable language of fraternal conversation, that he knew. Every day is a big day, Damien said. That's true. The warmth in Marco's voice shifted almost imperceptibly. Something underneath it, something that was satisfied. Good night, Damien. The call ended. Damien set the phone down on the desk. He sat very still. He looked at the documents, at the harbor through the window, at his own hands on the desk surface. His brother had called to take his temperature, to confirm that Damien didn't know. The call had the quality of someone who was 20 hours from the completion of a play they had spent over a year building and couldn't resist getting close to it. He picked up his phone and texted Raphael 3 words. He already knows. The response came back in under a minute. How? Damien looked at the phone. He thought about the 2 people he had discussed the restructure with. He thought about Raphael's pause when he had asked who else knew. He thought about the channel that Raphael had said he couldn't identify. He typed, "Find the channel tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." Then he went to the window and stood there in the dark, looking at the harbor, and felt the shape of the problem shift around him in real time. Marco knowing about the meeting changed the morning's calculus. Ferry's approach to Charlotte was no longer just a setup. It was a test. Marco wanted to see how Damien would respond, whether he'd intervene and expose his hand or stay back and let Charlotte walk into it. Either way, Marco would learn something useful. There was a third option. There was always a third option in situations like this, and finding it required the part of Damien's mind that had kept him alive and functional in an industry that killed men who couldn't find third options. He stood at the window for a long time, working it. At 1:17 in the morning, Raphael knocked on the suite door and came in without waiting for an answer, which meant it was urgent. His face had the look it got when information had arrived that changed the structure. "The channel," Damien said. "Elena Voss," Raphael said. Damien turned from the window. Elena Voss, the daughter of Henrik Brauer's silent partner in the Voss group. The woman who had been in the room during 3 of the 4 Voss group conversations over the past 8 months. The woman who had, on 2 separate occasions, asked specifically about the scope of the European operations, questions Damien had answered in general terms because the Voss Group partnership required a degree of transparency about organizational structure. "She and Marco," Damien said. 6 months, Raphael said. "I don't know how serious, but the information flow is clear. She attended the European Operations Overview meeting in Zurich last quarter as a Voss Group observer. Marco was there. After that meeting, the shape of his play changed. He added the timeline acceleration." Damien looked at him. The Voss Group negotiations. The entire reason he was in Monaco, the summit that had been impossible to pull out of, the deal that represented 8 months of strategic positioning, had been compromised. Not from outside. From within his own deliberate work. He had built the conditions that put him in this city, in this moment, adjacent to Charlotte, and the architecture of that setup had a hand in it that was not his. "How much of the Voss deal is real?" he said. "I don't know yet. Is Brauer involved?" "Unknown." Damien exhaled. It came out slow, controlled. The exhalation of a man who has just understood that the problem is larger than the room he has been trying to solve it in. "Marco arranged Monaco," he said. "Not just the Charlotte piece, the whole thing. He identified the Voss Group as a vehicle, used Elena to feed information, and built a situation where I would have to be here, and Charlotte would have to be here, and Ferry could make his move and I would either let it happen or intervene and hand Marco a record of interference that he could use in an entirely different way." He moved to the table. He picked up one of the financial documents, looked at it, set it back down. "He's not just trying to keep the European operations," he said. "He's trying to replace me." Raphael said nothing, which was confirmation. Damien stood at the table with the documents spread before him, at 1:17 in the morning in Monaco, with 10 o'clock coming like a wall, and the shape of the thing finally fully visible. Not the piece he had been examining, but the whole structure. His brother had spent 14 months building a mechanism designed not just to create leverage, but to dismantle him. The Charlotte play was one component. The Voss corruption was another. There were probably more he hadn't found yet. Marco had been patient and thorough and had used everything he knew about Damien, but his history with Charlotte, his ambitions for the European restructure, his investment in the Voss relationship, as he didn't sleep. There was no point pretending otherwise. He sat at the desk until 3 in the morning working through every component of what Raphael had laid out, building the response architecture the way he built everything, from the load-bearing elements up. When the structure was complete enough to hold weight, he stood, changed his shirt, drank a full glass of water standing at the bathroom sink, and looked at himself in the mirror for a moment with the particular attention of a man who is about to do something that will change the shape of his life and wants to be clear-eyed about it going in. He looked older than he remembered looking. The gray at his temples that Charlotte had noted. Lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. He looked like what he was. A man who had spent a decade and a half carrying something very heavy and had gotten very good at making it look effortless. He turned off the bathroom light. At 4:15, he texted Marco, "Don't come to Monaco. We need to talk, but not here. New York, end of the week." He put the phone face down on the desk. He needed Marco to believe the New York message. Needed him to understand it as a brother reaching out for a private conversation, not as a trap closing. The text had to sound like Damien had registered the late-night call and was responding to the family frequency of it, rather than to what was actually underneath it. The phone buzzed 20 minutes later. Marco. "Sure. Friday work?" Damien. "Friday works." He put the phone down again and sat with the silence of the suite, the harbor a dark shape through the window, and did the thing he had been avoiding since Raphael had said the name. He let himself think about Marco as a person, rather than as a problem. The 10-year-old who had followed him around the Connecticut estate because Damien was the thing in their household that felt most stable. The 22-year-old who had come into the organization still trying to figure out how not to be in his older brother's shadow. The man who had looked at 14 months of patient calculation and decided that the most efficient path to what he wanted ran directly through Charlotte Hayes. That was the part that sat differently from everything else. Not the ambition. Damien understood ambition. Not even the betrayal. He had seen that before, from people he'd trusted less. It was the instrument chosen. Using Charlotte, the specific history, the specific wound, the specific woman, meant Marco had understood exactly where the damage was and had pressed on it deliberately. That required a kind of coldness that Damien had not apparently adequately seen in his brother. That was on him. He picked up the documents and started reading through them again. Raphael was at the suite door at 6:30 with coffee and a folder. His eyes had the quality of a man who had also not slept, but Raphael's version of exhaustion looked almost identical to his normal state. A slight increase in the economy of his movements, slightly less excess in his expressions. Elena Voss, Raphael said, sitting down. I have the full communication record between her and Marco. 14 months. The information she passed covered the restructure thinking, the Voss Group meeting agendas, and your specific concerns about the European operations compliance exposure. She knew about the compliance concerns. You discussed them in a Voss Group session in February. She was in the room. Damien exhaled through his nose. The compliance exposure in the European operations was the specific trigger for the restructure, the reason he had been considering pulling the Zurich accounts under tighter central oversight. Marco had known about it because Elena had given it to him. And that knowledge was what had pushed Marco from testing boundaries to building the full mechanism. Because a restructure that centralized Zurich control meant Marco lost operational autonomy, he had been quietly expanding for 3 years. Brower, Damien said. Henrik. I've been on that since 2 a.m. Raphael opened the folder. I think Brower is clean. I think Elena acted independently. She's 29, she has ambitions that her position in her father's company doesn't fully accommodate, and Marco is, he paused for the right word, persuasive with people who want to believe someone sees their potential. She doesn't know what she handed him. Almost certainly not. She thinks she was in a relationship and sharing information in the context of trust. She doesn't know the full shape of what Marco built with it. Damien looked at the folder. That makes her a victim of this too. In a limited sense, yes. Which means she's also leverage I'm not going to use. He looked at Raphael. We don't touch her. Whatever happens with Marco, she's not part of it. Raphael held his gaze. That may limit your options. I know what it limits. I'm telling you anyway. Raphael nodded once, closed the folder. The meeting is in 3 hours and 40 minutes, Damien said. Walk me through exactly what we're doing. At 9:55, Charlotte Hayes walked into the conference center's side lounge wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a leather portfolio, looking like precisely what she was, a professional attending a professional meeting. She was 5 minutes early. She chose a chair with sight lines to both entrances and set her portfolio on the table and took out a single page of notes. Underneath the portfolio, in the interior pocket of her blazer, was a recording device the size of a thumbnail that Raphael had left at the front desk in an envelope marked with her name. She did not look like a woman who was nervous. That was because Charlotte Hayes, in 37 years, had learned that nervousness was a waste of energy she could spend on something more useful, and she had always been rigorous about allocating her energy correctly. She was, however, very precisely aware of every person who entered the room. Luca Ferri came in at 10:03. He was Italian, late 40s, olive-skinned, with the groomed ease of a man who wore expensive things without appearing to notice them. He moved like someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room, and he smiled at Charlotte with the specific warmth of a man who had done his research and was prepared to be charming in every direction she might require. Ms. Hayes, he said, extending his hand, Anton Brevet, thank you for making time. She shook his hand. His grip was confident and brief, the handshake of someone who had calibrated it as an instrument. Of course, she said. Please. He sat. He placed a slim leather document case on the table between them. He talked for the first 4 minutes about the Geneva Group, its philanthropic mandate, its track record in East Africa, all of it fluent, all of it specific enough to be credible, all of it constructed to create the impression of substantial institutional depth. Charlotte asked 3 questions. The questions were targeted. She asked about a specific project he had referenced, asked for a point of contact at the Kenyan Infrastructure Ministry he'd mentioned, asked about the fund's reporting structure to its primary donors. Each question was designed to identify a gap in the construction, the way you probe a wall to find where the structure is weak. Each time, Ferry had an answer. He was very good. The Nairobi expansion, he said, pivoting smoothly. We've been following Hayes Atelier's work in the region for 2 years. The Phase 2 scope you've outlined publicly addresses exactly the kind of community infrastructure gap our fund is designed to support. What aspect specifically draws your interest, Charlotte said. The sustainability integration. Most humanitarian architecture at this scale treats structural need and environmental impact as competing priorities. Your design philosophy treats them as the same problem, which is correct and rare. He paused. We'd like to be a co-funding partner for Phase 2. The figure we have in mind would cover approximately 40% of the capital gap you've publicly identified. Charlotte looked at him. She held the eye contact the way she held most things, without hurry, without performance. That's a substantial offer, she said. It's a substantial project. He reached into the document case and produced a single sheet, a term sheet, clean layout, professional typesetting. He placed it on the table and turned it to face her. This outlines the basic structure. Standard co-funding terms, full transparency on reporting requirements. Your team retains complete creative and operational control. She looked at the document without picking it up. She read it from where it lay, her eyes moving across it with the systematic attention she gave to anything structural. The terms were, on their surface, exactly what he said they were. Standard language. Nothing that announced itself as wrong. She picked it up. She read it twice. I'd want my legal team to review this before any further conversation, she said. Of course. His voice stayed warm, but there was the faintest shift, something slightly more deliberate in the stillness of his hands. We'd want to move relatively quickly on the decision timeline, given our funding cycle, but a preliminary indication of interest from you would allow us to hold the allocation while your team conducts due diligence. A preliminary indication of interest. Nothing binding, just an acknowledgement that the structure is conceptually workable from your side. There it was. The piece that wasn't on the document. A signature wasn't necessary. Just an acknowledgement, on record, that she found the structure acceptable. That was enough to establish a documented connection. Charlotte set the term sheet back down on the table. She looked at Luca Ferri across the width of the table, and for a moment, just a moment, she let him see something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not accusation, not anger. The calm, direct recognition of someone who has identified the full shape of something and is deciding what to do with the knowledge. His posture changed by perhaps 2 degrees. I'll have my team reach out, she said. She stood. She extended her hand. Thank you for the meeting. He shook her hand. His eyes were reading her now, recalibrating. She left the room. She was in the main corridor, 40 feet from the side lounge entrance, when Damien fell into step beside her. He had been in the conference center since 9:15, visible at a distance from the lounge entrance, positioned where he could see anyone going in and coming out without being readable as surveillance. He asked for a preliminary indication of interest, she said without breaking stride. Not a signature, just a verbal acknowledgement. Did you give one? No. I said my team would reach out. She kept walking, not toward the elevators, toward the main hall, where 400 conference attendees provided the best cover available. He knew I knew. At the end, he saw it. Which means he'll report back to Marco within the hour. Yes. Her voice was controlled but tight underneath it. The tightness of someone who has just sat across a table from a person using a false identity to run a corporate fraud operation and has kept their composure through the whole thing and is now feeling the shape of it in their body. That man has been watching my organization for 4 years and I had no idea he existed. I know. Stop saying I know? She said it without heat but precisely. Say something that helps. The recording is going to give us what we need, he said. His false identity on record, the mechanism of the ask, the specific language he used. That's enough to take to Marco with documented evidence of what he built. And then what? She said. You confront your brother. Yes. And if he doesn't respond to confrontation the way you're expecting, Damien said nothing for a moment. They were in the main hall now, the conference flow around them, two people in the current of a summit full of others. He glanced at her profile. He will, he said. That's not an answer. That's a hope. She stopped. She turned to face him, and her voice dropped to something that could not reach beyond the two of them. I need you to tell me honestly, what is the worst version of how this goes from here? He looked at her. He told her the truth. The worst version is that Marco has built more than Raphael has found, that the Voss group is more compromised than we think, that when I confront him, he has something ready that I haven't anticipated. He paused. And that your name ends up attached to this regardless of what you did or didn't sign, because proximity is sometimes enough. She absorbed that. She did not flinch. You need to take the meeting with him before he knows the recording exists. That's what Raphael is planning. Not what Raphael is planning. Her eyes were direct. What you are doing. Because this is your brother, and Raphael will run this like an operation, and you need to run it like a person. She paused. Or you'll win the tactical problem and lose the actual one. He looked at her for a moment. They were standing in the middle of a summit hall full of people conducting the public business of the world, and she was telling him something that no one else would have said to him, not because no one else had the access, but because no one else would have had the particular combination of knowing what he was and still expecting something better from him. The actual problem, he said. Marco is your brother, and he tried to use me to destroy you. Both of those things are true at the same time. What you do with that is going to define more about you than anything you've done in the last 7 years. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you to go easy on him. I'm telling you to go into that room knowing who you are, not just what you need to accomplish. He said nothing for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay, she said back, and it was not agreement, it was acknowledgement. Two people recognizing that they were past the point where there was a version of this that didn't cost something. She started to move. He caught her arm. Not hard, just the brief pressure of his hand on her forearm, the first time he had touched her in 7 years. She stopped. She looked at his hand, then at him. After this is done, he said, regardless of how it goes, I need you to... He stopped. He could feel the thing he wanted to say running up against everything she had told him at dinner, everything she had built, the life she had made that was entirely her own. He knew the argument she would make. He had heard it in her voice for 2 days, and he understood, completely and without resentment, that she was right to make it. I know, she said quietly, but ask me anyway. After. He let go of her arm. She walked. He stood in the conference hall for a moment, watching her move through the crowd until she disappeared into it, and then he turned and walked in the opposite direction, out a side exit, into a service corridor where Raphael was waiting with a phone and a car and the address of the restaurant where Marco Moretti had just arrived in Monaco, 11 hours ahead of schedule, because Marco had understood the New York text for exactly what it was and had decided to move first. He's here, Raphael said. I know. He came with 2 people. So did I. Damien kept walking. Where? Restaurant called La Brise, Harborside. He's been there 40 minutes. Raphael matched his stride. He's waiting for you. He called ahead. He texted 20 minutes ago. Said he reconsidered, decided Monaco worked better, wants to talk. Damien pushed through the service exit into the alley behind the conference center. The car was there. He got in without breaking stride. The drive to La Brise took 7 minutes. He spent them in complete silence, not reviewing strategy. The strategy was as built as it was going to get. He spent them doing what Charlotte had told him to do, knowing who he was going into the room, knowing what he was willing to pay and what he wasn't, knowing that the man he was about to sit across from had his blood in his veins and had spent 14 months trying to take everything Damien had built, and that both of those facts were going to be in the room at the same time, and there was no version of the confrontation that resolved cleanly. The car stopped. He got out. La Brise was small and harbor-facing, the lunch crowd thinning, the kind of place where the tables were spaced for privacy. Marco was at a corner table with sightlines to the entrance. He was dressed in a light jacket, his dark hair cut close, looking like exactly what he was, a handsome, composed, 34-year-old man who had not yet fully understood what the last 12 hours had cost him. He smiled when Damien came through the door. It was a good smile. That had always been the thing about Marco. The smile was completely real, even when everything around it wasn't. Damien sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A waiter appeared, and Damien sent him away with a look. Marco picked up his water glass, took a drink, set it down. "You got here fast," he said. "So did you." "I was already on my way." Marco's voice was easy, conversational, the voice of a man who believed he was still holding the better cards. New York felt too long to wait. 14 months is a long time to wait, Damien said. I imagine the last few days felt like nothing by comparison. The smile stayed, but Marco's eyes changed. A very slight recalibration, the look of someone who has just received information and is processing what it means without letting the processing show. "You want to tell me what we're actually talking about?" Marco said. Damien reached into his jacket and placed 3 documents on the table. The entity registration for the Geneva front, the financial trail from Zurich, the communication log between Elena Voss and Marco's personal phone. Marco looked at the documents. He did not pick them up. "Charlotte Hayes," Damien said. "Anton Breve, Luca Ferri, Elena Voss, the Zurich accounts, the term sheet he tried to put in front of her 2 hours ago." He looked at his brother across the table. "All of it." "I have all of it, Marco." The smile finally stopped. What replaced it was something Damien had not seen on his brother's face before. Not guilt, not fear. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and is close enough to the end of it to feel the weight differently. "How long, so?" Marco said. Raphael confirmed it last night, the full picture this morning. The channel was Elena. "Yes." Marco exhaled. A short, controlled sound. He looked at the table. Then he looked up. "I didn't want it to go to Charlotte directly." But it did. "Ferry moved faster than I—" He stopped. He looked at Damien. Something in his expression shifted again, and this time it was harder to read. Not the polished warmth, not the calculation underneath it. Something raw. Something that had been there the whole time underneath both of those layers. "I needed you to see me," he said. "That's the actual thing. I needed you to see that the European operations are mine, that I built something, that I'm not just the piece you placed on the board 11 years ago that you can move whenever the game requires it." Damien looked at his brother. "I see you," he said. His voice was quiet. "I've always seen you." "Then why was I never in the room?" Marco said. His voice was no longer composed. It had the jagged edge of something that had been held down for a very long time. Every major decision, the restructure, the Voss group, the compliance review. You talk to Raphael. You bring in people who've been with the organization since before I was born. You have never once sat me down and said, "Well, Marco, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think?" Damien looked at him. "Because I was protecting you," he said. "I didn't need protecting. I needed to be trusted." "They're not always different things." "They are." Marco's jaw was tight. "You protected me into a corner, and I made a mistake getting out of it." He looked at the documents on the table. "A serious mistake." "Yes," Damien said. "You did. Charlotte has nothing to do with any of this. She never should have been, but she was." Damien's voice did not rise, which was the most dangerous version of it. "You put her in it. You used 4 years of patient work to put a woman who has nothing to do with our organization into a position where her professional reputation could be destroyed on a wire transfer." He held his brother's gaze. "Whatever I failed to give you, that was not the answer to it." Marco held the gaze. He didn't look away, which was something. "What happens now?" he said. Damien looked at him across the table. The harbor was visible through the restaurant's glass. Boats moving, water catching light, Monaco doing its indifferent thing. He thought about what Charlotte had said in the conference hall. Knowing who you are, not just what you need to accomplish. "Ferry is finished," he said. "That's not negotiable. What he did here, the false identity, the approach to Charlotte, that ends his involvement in anything connected to this organization." Marco said nothing. "Elena Voss is not touched," Damien continued. "She made a mistake in the context of a relationship that was being deliberately constructed to extract information. She doesn't pay for that. Agreed, Marco said quietly. The European operations get restructured, not because I want you out, because the compliance exposure is real and the structure needs to change. You'll be part of designing the new structure, not as the person being managed, as a decision maker. He paused. That's the conversation I should have started 8 months ago instead of building toward it alone. Marco was looking at him with an expression that was difficult to name, something between the thing you feel when a tension you've been holding finally releases and the thing you feel when you understand that the release cost more than it should have. And Charlotte, Marco said. Charlotte is not part of any conversation we have ever again, Damien said. Her name, her organization, her work, none of it is a piece on any board. Do you understand that completely? Yes, Marco said. I understand it. They looked at each other across the table, two brothers in a harbor restaurant in Monaco, the documents between them, the full weight of the last 14 months, and the 10 years before them, and the 34 years before that, sitting in the air without anywhere to go. I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry, Damien said. I know. And it's going to take time. I know that too. Damien looked at him. He picked up the documents and returned them to his jacket. He stood. Friday, he said. New York. We start building the new structure. Marco looked up at him. Something in his face was different than it had been when Damien walked in. Not relieved, not resolved, but present in a way it hadn't been. Real, without the performance. Friday, he said. Damien turned toward the exit. He was 3 steps from the door when his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. A text from a number he didn't recognize, no contact name, and the text was a single image. A photograph, taken from a distance, grainy with zoom compression but clear enough. Charlotte, outside the conference center, in conversation with a man Damien didn't recognize. Underneath the image, 2 words. She talked. Damien stopped. He looked at the image again. He looked at the man in the photograph. Early 50s, gray suit, the posture of someone official. Not Ferry. Someone else entirely. He put the phone back in his pocket. He turned and looked back at Marco, who was still at the table, who had not moved, whose expression when he met Damien's eyes was not the expression of a man who had just sent a text, which meant there was someone else, someone who was not Marco, who had not been in any document Raphael had built, who had just told Damien that Charlotte had spoken to someone she shouldn't have, or that someone wanted Damien to believe she had. He stood in the doorway of La Brise with the Mediterranean at his back and understood that the thing he had thought was the full picture. He called Raphael before he reached the car. The photograph, he said the moment Raphael picked up. Someone sent me a photograph of Charlotte outside the conference center. Gray suit, male, 50s. Not Ferry, not anyone in the documents you built. A pause. 3 seconds. Send it to me. Already sent. He was moving through the side street beside La Brise, away from the harbor, the afternoon sun hitting the white walls at an angle that made everything too bright. I need that man identified in 20 minutes, and I need to know where Charlotte is right now. She went back to the conference center after the ferry meeting. My man has eyes on her. Tell him not to let her out of his sight. He won't. Damien ended the call. He stood on the street for a moment, the phone warm in his hand, and made himself think clearly about what the photograph meant before he let himself react to it. 2 possibilities. First, there was a third actor, someone not connected to Marco, not in Raphael's picture, who had independent interest in either Charlotte or Damien and had been watching the summit with enough preparation to have a photographer in position. Second, someone connected to Marco's operation, but operating through a channel that Marco himself had not disclosed in the restaurant, Malsat, which would mean the conversation at La Brise had been partially controlled, Marco giving up the components he knew were already identified while protecting a deeper layer. He walked back toward La Brise. Marco was still at the table. He hadn't moved, which told Damien something. A man with another exit would have used the time to take it. Damien sat back down. He placed his phone on the table between them, the photograph on the screen. Marco looked at it. His face did something. A brief, genuine contraction around the eyes. Not guilt. Something closer to the look of a man who has just seen a variable he didn't account for. I don't know who that is, Marco said. Look carefully. I don't know him. He looked up. I'm telling you the truth. Whatever this is, it's not mine. Damien looked at his brother. He had spent 34 years learning how to read Marco's face, the way the micro-expressions distributed across it when he was constructing versus when he was reporting. What he saw now was not construction. "Then we have a problem that's larger than both of us," Damien said. He picked up the phone and walked out. Raphael called back in 14 minutes. "His name is Bernard Cassel," Raphael said. "French national. Former Direction Générale de la Sécurité Extérieure, Intelligence Service. Retired 6 years ago. Spent the last 4 operating as a private intelligence contractor." "Who does he work for?" "Currently on contract with a group called the Consortium Adriatique. It's a shell. I'm still pulling the full structure, but the initial layer traces to 3 European investment funds that have been circling Moretti organization assets for 2 years. They've been watching the European operations specifically." Damien stopped walking. He was in the alley behind the conference center, and the information arrived in the way that major reconfigurations always arrived. Not with a dramatic feeling, but with a sudden, complete shift in the geometry of everything. "They've been watching the European operations for 2 years, he said. "The same period Ferry has been testing the boundaries of what he can move without my oversight." "Yes." Raphael's voice was careful now, the way it got when he was laying something down that had weight he hadn't fully mapped. "It's possible Ferry was not acting on Marco's behalf originally. It's possible he was acting on the consortium's behalf, and Marco identified that and tried to use the existing mechanism for his own play. Which means Ferry may have been compromised before Marco got to him." "Yes." Damien pressed his hand flat against the alley wall. The stone was warm. He focused on that. "So the full picture is, the consortium has had someone inside my European operation for at least 2 years. Ferry was their man. Marco found out about Ferry and tried to leverage the existing infrastructure for his own purposes without understanding who actually owned it. And the consortium has been watching all of it. Marco's play, my response, Charlotte, from the outside. That's my current read, yes. And the photograph. A message, Raphael said. They want you to know they're watching. They want you to know they have access to Charlotte and they have eyes on your response in real time. They're not threatening action. They're demonstrating capability. Damien exhaled. What do they want? The European restructure. Specifically, they want to know which direction it goes, because if you centralize the Zurich accounts under your direct oversight, you close the access point Ferry has been providing. They lose 2 years of positioning inside your operation. And if I don't restructure, then they keep the access point, and they keep the ability to move money through Moretti infrastructure at a layer below your visibility. He stood in the alley and let the full shape of it finish arriving. The consortium had used Ferry to establish a quiet channel into his European operations. Marco had tried to exploit that channel for his own purposes. Both of them had used Charlotte as a pressure instrument for different reasons, with different mechanics, without either of them fully understanding what the other was doing. And the result was that Charlotte Hayes, who had spent 7 years building a life with no connection to any of this, was standing in the middle of it, on record at a conference with a photograph of her in an intelligence contractor's file. Where's Castle now? Damien said. Conference Center, East Wing. He's been there since this morning. And Charlotte? Main hall. She's attending a panel. He moved. Come up. He found Castle in the East Wing corridor, standing with the relaxed patience of a man who had been waiting in corridors for most of his professional life. He was 61 or 62 up close, gray-haired, a face that had the quality of someone who had spent decades watching things without reacting to them. He saw Damien coming and didn't move, didn't straighten, didn't shift his weight, didn't reach for anything. He just waited. Damien stopped 2 feet from him. Mr. Moretti, Castle said. His English was precise, lightly accented. I wondered if we'd have an opportunity. You sent the photograph, Damien said. I sent a photograph, Cassell said, to clarify that certain conversations are being observed. What do you want? Cassell looked at him with the mild expression of a man who found directness refreshing. My clients want to know your intentions regarding the European operational structure, specifically the Zurich accounts. Your client should request a meeting through conventional channels. They felt a more immediate communication was appropriate given the timeline. He paused. The restructure, if it proceeds as you're planning, affects a number of interests that have been carefully positioned over a significant period. Carefully positioned using my infrastructure without my knowledge. Damien said. Castle's expression didn't change. Ferry made operational decisions within his authorized scope. The relationships he developed were consequential of that scope. Don't manage the language with me. Damien's voice was level, which was its dangerous register. You put a man inside my operation. You used my financial infrastructure for 2 years without authorization. And then you put a photograph of a private individual in my phone to remind me that you have the capability to make her a problem. The photograph was informational, Cassell said, not a threat. It's a threat if I interpret it as one. You're free to interpret it as you choose. Cassell looked at him steadily. My clients are not unreasonable. They're asking for a conversation about the restructure before decisions are finalized. A conversation that addresses their positioning in a way that doesn't require the complete closure of the access they've established. No, Damien said. Castle waited. There is no version of this conversation where I discuss the structure of my operations with a contractor representing an entity I cannot fully identify, Damien said. And there is no version where the access point continues. It closes. That was the decision before Monaco, and it remains the decision. That decision has consequences, Castle said. Most decisions do. Damien looked at him. The photograph of Ms. Hayes. I need you to understand something about that specifically. Castle waited. She is not a mechanism in this conversation. Whatever your clients believe they have in that file, whatever proximity they think gives them leverage, they are mistaken about what it is worth. Because if anything that connects her name to any of this becomes visible in any form, in any context, I will not respond to it as an operational problem. His voice stayed completely level. I will respond to it personally. Do you understand the difference? Castle looked at him for a long moment. Something in the older man's face moved. Not intimidation, something more like the recognition of a man who has been in enough serious conversations to know when the language has shifted from negotiation to declaration. I'll communicate your position, Castle said. Do that. Damien held his gaze for one more second. And tell your clients to find a different infrastructure. He walked away. Tech. He found Charlotte in the main hall as the panel she had attended was releasing, people moving in clusters toward the exit and the coffee station and the next thing on the agenda. She was talking to a young woman, early 30s, earnest, a conference lanyard that identified her as a graduate student in urban planning. And she was giving the young woman her complete attention, the way she gave everything her complete attention. She was smiling. It was a real smile, not the professional version, something quieter, something that happened when she wasn't thinking about whether she was smiling. He stood at the edge of the hall and watched her for a moment. He thought about 7 years, about the night in the penthouse when she had sketched at the kitchen table while he pretended to read, listening to the sound of her pen, thinking, without knowing it was the last time, that this was the most peaceful thing he had ever had access to. He thought about the hotel garden this morning and her hand closing the sketchbook. He thought about what she had said in the conference corridor. Ask me anyway. After. After was now. He waited until the young woman had taken Charlotte's card and moved away with the slightly dazed expression of someone who had just gotten more than they expected from a conversation. Then he crossed the hall. She saw him coming. Her expression did the thing it had been doing since the main stage 2 days ago. Not the careful neutrality of the conference professional, something underneath that, something that was still deciding. It's done, he said. She looked at him. Ferry, Marco, the other situation, the consortium. He said it briefly because she had a right to the summary and he was not going to manage what she knew about her own situation. Raphael is handling the documentation. The European restructure proceeds on my terms. The access point closes. She was quiet for a moment. And your brother? Friday, New York. We'll build something different. It won't be easy and it'll take time, but we'll do it. He paused. You were right about that. The way you said to go in, knowing who I was rather than just what I needed to accomplish. Did it work? I think so. I won't know for sure for a while. She nodded slowly. Around them, the hall was thinning, the conference moving toward its afternoon sessions. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the space became busy again. The photograph, she said. The man who sent it. Bernard Cassell, private intelligence contractor. He and I had a conversation in the East Wing an hour ago. Her expression shifted. You went to find him? Yes. Damien, he needed to understand that certain things were not available as leverage, he said. I communicated that. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for things that were simultaneously frustrating and underneath that something else. I can handle my own. I know you can. He said it before she finished, and he meant it without qualification. This wasn't about what you can handle. It was about what I was willing to tolerate. She held his gaze. The frustration was still there, but the something else was more present now. You said to ask you, he said. After. You said, ask me anyway. She was very still. I'm not asking you to come back to something we were, he said. That's gone. I know it's gone. I'm not standing here with a version of the future that requires you to rewind 7 years and make different choices. He looked at her directly. I'm asking whether there's something that starts from here, from who you are now and who I am now, not a second attempt at what we were. Something we haven't built yet. Charlotte Hayes stood in the main hall of the Global Leadership Summit in Monaco, 7 years after she had walked out of a ballroom in a wedding dress and handed back a ring with more dignity than most people could manage on their best day, and she was quiet for a long time. He let her be quiet. He did not fill it. You're asking me to trust the organization to stay out of my life, she said finally. Not just you, the whole structure. Yes, and you can't guarantee that, because you just spent 2 days demonstrating that the structure generates situations you don't fully control. I can't guarantee it, he said. That would be dishonest. What I can tell you is that the restructure closes the vulnerabilities that created this week, and that I would spend whatever it costs to make sure your work is never in proximity to my work. It's not just about my work. Her voice was quiet. It's about my life. I built it to be mine, completely. No one else's structure around it. I know. I don't want to be protected, she said. I don't want someone standing between me and the consequences of living. I want to make my own choices and live with what they cost. I know that too. She looked at him. Then you understand why this is hard. Yes. And you're asking anyway. Yes. She was quiet for another long moment. The hall was almost empty now. The last of the panel audience filed out, a cleaning crew beginning to move chairs at the far end. The Mediterranean light was doing its thing through the high windows, falling across the floor in long rectangles. I'm going back to Nairobi in 10 days, she said. I'll be there for 6 weeks, the Phase 2 project. I know. She looked at him sharply. The public project page has a timeline, he said. I've been following the public project page. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated and more honest than a smile. For how long? 3 years, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her portfolio from the seat beside her where she'd set it down during the panel, and she held it against her chest, the gesture of someone organizing themselves before they do something that requires a decision. And she said, I'm having dinner alone tonight. If you wanted to have dinner in the same restaurant at the same time, I wouldn't ask you to leave. He looked at her. That's all I can give you right now, she said. Same restaurant, same time. We're two people who used to know each other and are currently in the same city. She held his gaze. No history on the table. No negotiation of what comes next. Just dinner. What restaurant? He said. She told him. He nodded once. She walked toward the exit. At the door she paused, not turning around, just a brief pause in her stride. And then she was through it and gone. He stood in the empty hall for a moment. Then he went to find Raphael. The dinner lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. They talked about Nairobi. She explained the specific structural challenges of Phase 2, the load-bearing complications of building on land with poor drainage, the political negotiation required to get the right permits from 3 different municipal authorities, the moment 3 months ago when the primary contractor had tried to substitute materials, and she had fired them on the spot and started over, because she did not accept substitutions in materials or in people. He told her about the Rotterdam port deal, the real version, not the summit version. The 8 months of negotiation, the specific moment the Dutch government had nearly walked, what it had taken to bring them back. He talked about it the way he talked about work when he was not performing authority, directly, including the parts where he had been wrong, including the thing he had gotten backward that had cost him 6 weeks of recovered ground. They ate. They drank 1 glass of wine each. The restaurant was small and harbor-facing and made the kind of food that didn't announce itself. At some point, without either of them marking the moment it changed, the conversation stopped being about work. She told him about the first Hayes Atelier project, the tiny rented office, the investor who had sat across from her and told her the concept was admirable but not financially viable, and how she had gone home that night and sat on the floor of her apartment for an hour, not crying. She had been past crying by that point. Just sitting, letting the specific weight of it be there, and then had gotten up and revised the financial model and gone back 2 weeks later with different numbers. Did he fund it? Damien said. No, she said, but the revision led me to a different funding structure that was actually better. He did me a favor by saying no. She looked at her wine glass. Most of the things that felt like walls turned out to be redirections. He looked at her across the table. Most, he said. She looked up. Most, she confirmed. They sat with that for a moment. I didn't become less angry, she said. That's something people get wrong about forgiveness. I didn't stop being angry. I stopped letting the anger be the thing I organized my life around. There's a difference. She paused. I was angry for about 4 years. Real anger, the kind that shows up at 3 a.m. uninvited. And after 4 years. After 4 years, I was too busy to maintain it at that intensity. She said it simply, without pride. The Bogota project started, then Dar es Salaam, then Nairobi Phase 1, and at some point I looked up and realized the anger was still there, but it was smaller than the work. And the work was mine. Completely. She looked at him. That was the first time I felt like I'd actually won something. Damien looked at her across the table. In the restaurant she had chosen, in the city neither of them had planned to share this week, and he understood something that he had been close to understanding for 2 days, but hadn't fully reached until now. She had not survived him in spite of what happened. She had, in some terrible and real and irreversible way, needed it to happen. Not because she deserved it, she had not deserved it, but because the version of her life that grew from the ruins of what he had done was the version she had always been capable of and had not, until she was stripped of every other option, been forced to build. He did not say that. It was too large to say and too close to something that could sound like he was making the wound into something useful, which he had no right to do. Instead, he said, "Tell me about Nairobi." She told him about Nairobi. She talked for 40 minutes about the specific community, the specific families, the woman named Amara, who ran the local governance committee and had spent 3 years fighting the city's planned demolition of the neighborhood and had been the person who first contacted Hayes Atelier. She talked about the architecture, the way she had designed the restored structures to face each other across a shared courtyard, creating what she called a topology of connection, a spatial arrangement that made community not just possible, but structurally inevitable. She talked about it with the particular energy she brought to things she loved. Completely present, slightly too fast, her hands moving. He watched her hands. He thought about the kitchen in the penthouse, the sound of the pen. When the dinner ended and they walked out onto the street together, the harbor was dark and full of light, the way harbors are at night. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not quite ready to name the ending of the evening. "Same time tomorrow," she said. It was not a question exactly. It had the quality of something offered carefully. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face was different from any expression she had worn in 2 days of conference corridors and hard conversations. Quieter. Less defended. Not open. Charlotte Hayes was never undefended. It was not in her nature. And he had learned across 7 years of memory and 2 days of reunion that her defenses were not walls against the world, but structures she had built to hold herself upright. And he had no interest in asking her to dismantle them. But underneath the structure, something that had been turned away from him for 7 years was, tonight, facing a slightly different direction. "You followed the project page," she said, "for 3 years. Nairobi Phase 1 went up in February. She looked at the harbor, the community courtyard, the topology of connection. The press called it my best work." "It is your best work," he said. "I've read everything written about it." She was quiet for a moment. "The courtyard faces east," she said. "Every family in that community sees the same sunrise. I designed it that way because I wanted them to have one moment every day that belonged to all of them equally." She paused. "I thought about the penthouse kitchen when I designed it. You used to face east." He was very still. "Not about you," she said quickly. About the light. The quality of the morning light in that kitchen. She paused. Good architects steal from everything that ever meant something to them. It's in the work. Most people don't know where it came from. He looked at her. I know where it came from, he said. She looked at him with that expression, the complicated, honest, not quite smiling one. And then she said goodnight and walked toward the hotel entrance, and he stood on the sidewalk and watched her go. He left Monaco the following afternoon. There had been one more dinner, and it had been quieter than the first, and at the end of it, she had stood on the sidewalk and looked at him with the expression of someone who has made a decision they have not yet said out loud. And she had said, "When I'm back from Nairobi, 6 weeks. If you wanted to have coffee in New York, I would probably say yes." "Probably," he said. "Probably is what I have," she said. "Take it or don't." He took it. The flight back to New York was 9 hours and 20 minutes. He slept for 4 of them, which was more than he had slept in 3 days. When he woke up, the Atlantic was below, and the cabin was quiet, and Raphael was in the seat across from him, reading a physical newspaper, which meant there was nothing urgent. Damien sat with the particular silence of a man who has come through something and is not yet on the other side of it, who is in the space between the thing that was and the thing that will be, which is always the hardest place to be and always the most important. He thought about what Charlotte had said. The courtyard faces east, the morning light, something she had taken from their shared history and built into the most significant work of her professional life without it being about him, without it being for him, without him having any claim to it. It belonged to the families in Nairobi. It belonged to the architecture. It belonged to Charlotte. He understood something sitting in that aircraft at 37,000 feet that he had been trying to understand for 7 years, reaching toward it from different angles, getting close, and then retreating. The thing he had lost was not Charlotte. He had not lost Charlotte the way you lose something that belonged to you and should return. He had lost the version of himself that was capable of being the person she needed him to be. And she had gone out and become the person she was meant to be in the space created by his failure to become his, and neither of those things were going back to before. But here was the thing that was new, the thing that Monaco had produced that he had not anticipated going in. Before was not the only option. There was also here, and there was also after here, and the shape of what those things might be was not yet built, which meant it was not yet wrong, which meant, for the first time in 7 years, there was something ahead that was not just consequence. He looked out the window at the Atlantic. He thought about Friday, about Marco across a table in New York, and the conversation they would have, and how long it would take for something genuine to grow back over the damage. A long time. Possibly a very long time. Possibly something that never fully recovered to what it had been, which meant they would have to build something different rather than restore something original, which was harder, but also, he was learning, often what was actually called for. He thought about the European restructure, the work of closing the access point, rebuilding the Zurich oversight structure, finding where else the consortium had positioned things he hadn't seen. It would take 6 months at minimum. It would require decisions he hadn't fully mapped yet. He thought about Bernard Cassel and the photograph and the message he had sent back. He was not naive about what that message would cost. The consortium would not simply accept the closure of their access and move on. There would be a response. He would handle it when it came. He thought about Charlotte in Nairobi, the Phase 2 project, the courtyard that faced east, a woman doing the most meaningful work of her life, 6 weeks from a coffee in New York that was a probably rather than a yes, which was honestly a more honest beginning than anything built on certainty would have been. He put his hands on the armrests. He looked at the ocean. In the breast pocket of his jacket, the engagement ring she had returned 7 years ago sat in its velvet box. He had carried it for 7 years without fully knowing why, not as a talisman, not as a reminder, just as the physical fact of something that had been interrupted. He reached into the pocket and took it out and held it in his palm. The cabin light caught the stone. He sat with it for a moment. Then he put it back in the box, and he put the box back in his pocket, and he settled into the seat, and he let the aircraft carry him forward, which was the only direction available, which was, when he was honest about it, enough. The Atlantic moved below him. The horizon held. Damien Moretti, at 41 years old, at the top of everything he had built and the bottom of everything he had broken, flew toward home with the particular feeling of a man who has survived the worst version of his own story and come out the other side still standing, changed, marked, depleted in the ways that matter, and intact in the ways that matter more. He did not know yet what the next version of his life would look like. He knew it would be harder and more honest than the last one. He knew there was a woman in Nairobi counting sunrise mornings in a courtyard that faced east. He knew that probably was not nothing. He closed his eyes. He slept.